I just first want to get your reaction to what you saw last week, the meeting between President Joe Biden and President Vladimir Putin of Russia. What did you think of their first meeting of this new Biden administration? What would you have liked to see out of the summit? Did it live up to expectations? Was there anything positive that came out of it?
I actually think that the review that I read that encapsulated things the most efficiently and the most accurately was by Harlan Ullman, who, by the way, in The Hill, if you know that publication. And Harlan was the one man many, many years ago that Colin Powell called my attention to as a part of his experience at the National War College when he was a colonel. He said to me and gave me proof of that over time that Harlan was one of the smartest people he'd ever met, especially in national security affairs. So Harlan wrote this piece in The Hill, and I read many others that disagreed with Harlan, but I think Harlan encapsulated this almost tour de force by President Biden, following the exact opposite by President Trump and first Tillerson, but magnified greatly by Pompeo and Kushner. And by that, I mean, he went into a series of meetings that would challenge any president. He went to an EU summit. He went to a NATO summit. He went to a G7 meeting in Cornwall. I've been in Cornwall when it was flooded, but it's a beautiful place when it isn't flooded. And then he went to a Putin summit in Geneva. This is quite a challenge, but as Harlan pointed out, this is a man with 36 years experience in the Congress, including chairmanship of the Judiciary Committee and, more relevant, the Foreign Affairs Committee. And a man who spent 8 years, as did George H.W. Bush, the last really experienced president since Eisenhower under Reagan, as vice president. So how would we expect anything but at least some positive, if not a lot of positive, out of this series of meetings? And I think there was a lot of positive. There were some negatives too. The positives, I think, were the G7 in Cornwall made some decisions that it had been struggling to make for some time. The NATO summit, I would say, probably had, as Harlan did in his piece, the only really, in my view, and Harlan's too, as I said, deeply disturbing aspect, and it can be modified as time goes by, but it was the attempt to get the NATO partners, now 30 in number, a very untenable alliance now, political and military, to get them to buy into the anti-China chorus, if you will. And many of them just simply aren't having it, thank God, in my view. So that was a wrinkle in the meetings. The big one, the meeting in Geneva with Putin, I think really turned out to be certainly positive, with maybe a burp here or there. But the working groups that were established will be the proof of the pudding. And I wanted to just make sure I get these right. One was on strategic stability, a huge issue. It includes everything from Ukraine to nuclear weapons. The second was on arms control per se, including nuclear weapons, of course. Another on cyber operations, another on Syria, and then others that reaffirm the Ukrainian process, however broken it might seem at the present time, and then others. But those were highlighted, and Harlan highlighted those too. And I think that's very important. I'm particularly encouraged by the fact, I know Putin wanted this. I think he actually brought it up in Helsinki, but nobody ever did a decent report, and Trump wasn't saying anything about it. He wants nuclear arms control because above everything else, with the possible exception of climate change, he knows that that's existential. We could ruin everything in a heartbeat with nuclear weapons. We still possess enough to destroy the world, destroy the planet and every human being on it. And we've eradicated all arms control, virtually eradicated it. I was so I was ecstatic when I saw that one of the first acts was to extend New START, the only thing we have left for 5 years. Now we need to work on everything else, and eventually we need to bring in the other nuclear powers. We need to bring in North Korea. We need to bring in China. We need to bring Pakistan and India, and we need to bring in Israel badly. We need to bring in Israel and twist their arm until they come. I don't care if they come kicking and screaming. They need to come into the regime. Now, I'm talking probably a decade's worth of work here. But I think the Biden Putin summit was a positive all in all. I wish some of the language that I heard and was transcripted, at least officially, I think, from the White House, was a little bit bellicose on both sides, but that's understandable. I'm glad that they sat down. I'm glad that apparently they had a good discussion. No one probably was better equipped to have that discussion on our side than Joe Biden. And I'm glad that there seemed to be some positive results of it. I'm going to see, as Biden himself said, we'll see in 6 months just how positive this was, particularly referring to the working group. So I'm optimistic.
That's good to hear. I was certainly optimistic when I heard about the formulation of those working groups, especially in regard to preventing what is of great concern to me, our organization, a lot of the activists on this call, and that is the potential for nuclear accidents, for an accidental nuclear war. Do you feel that that is something that both sides are really going to address seriously?
I certainly hope so. And as I indicated, primarily China in that regard, but Russia and China together, India and Pakistan right there close by, have to be a part of this. Because as you're probably aware, in 2002, we came very close to a nuclear exchange, and Colin Powell went to Delhi, and George W. Bush picked up the phone, and Rich Armitage went to Islamabad, and we sort of taught the Indians and the Pakistanis about all our history of nuclear deterrence theory and so forth and so on. We actually gave them permissive action locks for their weapons, which simply means in layman's terms that you need 2 keys. We were stunned at the naivete of both sides. So there are problems with nuclear weapons in the world outside the US-Russia relationship, but that's the huge one. That's where the preponderance of weapons is. And that's where the megatonnage and the yield is so vast that, again, we could destroy the world. No question about that now. If you listen to Daniel Ellsberg lately, he's very emphatic about that. And he's right. We would destroy the world. So I'm, as I said, I'm optimistic that maybe we're going to get this under control. Let me give you an example of just how difficult it is in this country, because the nuclear complex is a composite, a sub part of the military industrial complex, which has just become beyond Eisenhower's expectations, I think, ever. Just become so influential, so much playing in national security decision-making and in the warfare state we have become over the last 20 years. A potent part of that is the nuclear industry and the congressmen and congresswomen who support that nuclear industry. President Obama in his nuclear posture review and then in his budget put $1.2, $1.3 trillion towards new weapons. Let me give you an example of how silly some of this is. No, not silly, that's not the right word. How absurd some of this is. The Navy is now fighting the Congress because they don't want the SLICM-N. That's the submarine launch cruise missile nuclear. And they don't want it for a number of reasons, probably most prominently because it steals money away from other things they do want, most of those conventional. But think of this for a moment. You got a submarine out there and it opens its firing door and fires a missile. How do you differentiate, if you're a Russian or Chinese, how do you differentiate between that being a tactical missile, the SLICM nuclear, or that being a ballistic missile? The moment that door opens and you detect from your satellites that there's fire in the chamber and you get a little bit of the trajectory, you're going to probably fire yourself. So this is extremely dangerous, just as ballistic missiles on land are extremely dangerous because they're fixed targets. Everybody knows where they are. And so one of the things any nuclear power launching a first strike would do is take those out, take them out completely. So they're useless, really, and they cost billions of dollars, but they have an enormous part of this lobby behind them. And so it's going to be very difficult to do that. Bill Perry, former Secretary of Defense, in his book, The Button, along with Tom Kalina, says we should get rid of that leg of the triad. So talks over the next decade or so, I wish they could occur faster, to reestablish arms control are, next to confronting climate change, probably the most important thing we need to do. And I'm glad to see that we've got off to a good start, it looks like.
And we certainly agree with you there, and we oppose nuclear modernization, both by the United States and Russia, that will really tie us into this brinksmanship for generations to come, especially those land-based missiles that you referred to that are targets because of the lose them or use them or lose them mentality. It's really a leg of the triad that is more of a vulnerability than a strength or a deterrent at all. You mentioned New START. We applauded the administration for taking up the Russians on their offer to extend New START for another 5 years. What about the status of our other nuclear treaties? I was very dismayed to see a few weeks ago the United States say that they had no intention to re-enter the Open Skies Treaty, and now just in the past few days, the Russians have followed suit.
I think that was a stupid move. I can't put it any more bluntly than that. I think abandoning the INF treaty, and let's go all the way back to my administration, abandoning the ABM treaty, the anti-ballistic missile treaty, so we could build hundreds of billions of dollars of missile defense that technically we don't even know works. We still don't even know if it works. And this is a product of the military industrial complex and led by Lockheed Martin, the #1 death merchant in the world. Their sway, their influence, their power is so great with people like Jim Inhofe, people like Bob Menendez in the other party, that they can almost call the tune when it comes to things like this. And of course, the Secretary of Defense in our administration, Donald Rumsfeld, was a product of ballistic missile defense. He was an advocate for it all along, all the way back really to the Reagan administration. So we have put a lot of money into something that we don't even know works. We have convinced allies to take it. And frankly, it might be a pig in a poke. I mean, it might not even do what it's supposed to do, but it is extremely destabilizing. And this may be the most prominent negative aspect of it when it comes to dealing with arms control and dealing with someone like Vladimir Putin, or for that matter, Xi Jinping in China. China is on the verge of, and probably already has in its Central Party School, which gestates these strategic ideas and puts them up for the Politburo to decide on. It's already decided that we're nuts, that Mao Zedong, who said nuclear weapons are useless, I don't want to ever have any more than is necessary to deter other nuclear powers. His idea is passé now. Because of the desire to have a first strike capability, China is probably going to break out and build more nuclear weapons. All of this because of our missile defense apparatus and because of our inability to do what the Moscow Treaty in 2002, negotiated basically by my boss, said we would do, and that is by 2022, 2023, be it something like 1,200 weapons apiece. Instead, we're still at 4,000 plus apiece. So we arrested the progress contained in that treaty. And of course, we were actually helping the Russians destroy their weapons. We had teams in Russia helping to destroy their nuclear warheads. So we have reversed all of that progress to a certain extent and are heading in the other direction. The other thing the anti-ballistic missile treaty abnegation by George W. Bush did was start the process. It essentially said to the rest of the world, as I intimated Karl Rove said to Ron Suskind, that we're an empire, and when we act, we make reality. It made reality. It essentially said to the world, we're through with arms control. Now we're going to talk about actually fighting a nuclear war. And indeed, that is what my military, your military, is doing today, actually talking about fighting a nuclear war, which is just patently absurd. All these years of experience and academic endeavor and analysis and so forth, everything from RAND to think tanks all over the area and in Europe, gone. We can fight a nuclear war. That's all these tactical nuclear weapons mean, in essence, is they believe we can fight a nuclear war. That's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. If we go nuclear, we will go whole hog. And that's a very frightening prospect.